A wee 30 minutes to speak to you about this today. Now Archie and Andrew will tell you I can go on at great length on these subjects, so I'm going to try and restrict myself so I can get through most of this in the 30 minutes. But as Linda said, it is a brief overview that I'm going to give you today. I've got a wee further reading list here that I'll hand out to you all, so if like Linda, you're looking for something extra, hopefully you'll find it there. I'll take some questions at the end as well, if there's anything that you'd like to know a bit more about, but I do have to warn you now, I can't answer any questions about specific issues that have got legal implications, because we're not insured for me giving legal advice, just in case you end up in court and say, that Carol said. So, yeah, general issues, happy to answer questions on at the end. So we'll just kick off then. I'm talking obviously today about equalities mainstreaming in the voluntary sector. It's a big issue, but I've tried to tease out some of the most relevant bits for you this afternoon. So to start out, just to be clear on what I'm talking about when I'm talking about equality, I always like to go back to the kind of roots of it, back to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And what we've got here is Article 1 of the Declaration, which says that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They're endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood, which of course is a wee bit sexist, but it's okay because they meant well. So that's what I see as the kind of foundations of our modern equality concepts and equality law. But to put it in slightly more user-friendly terms, I think when we're trying to implement equalities in our organisation, what we're really talking about is treating people as well as we can within our power and according to their own individual needs. I think these are the kind of key things that we need to be looking at in order to implement equalities from an ethical point of view, but also in order to meet our legal obligations, because that's kind of the foundations of the laws that we have. So the Mainstreaming Equalities Programme is the thing that led me to be here speaking to you today. Archie and Andrew were both on that programme recently. It's a 5-day programme that GCVS is delivering around the country as part of the Support and Voluntary Action funded Applying Equalities Good Practice project, for which I am the project worker. So what we did on that programme was a broad overview of equalities mainstreaming, but it also involved voluntary organisations like VAER sharing their own experience today of equality and accessibility issues. So it was really a kind of learning opportunity on a wider scale than just a training course. We looked at a lot of different mainstreaming tools, different techniques that we can use in our organisations. It's a 5-day course, I should say, over 5 months. So there was plenty of time for homework, etc. Looking at things like equality law and looking at internal policies within organisations, considering consultation and involvement, action planning, we did a fair bit on equality impact assessment, we did some on access auditing and equalities monitoring as well. That's just the kind of flavour of what we went through. So you can see it's a pretty big issue. We are doing one more run of that course in Inverness starting next week, and there's a tiny number of places left, so if anybody's interested, grab me at the end and let me know. But moving on swiftly from that introduction to what we usually do on mainstreaming equalities, we'll come back to why it's important for the voluntary sector. At the most basic level, even for people who aren't that keen on egalitarianism, fairness, etc., we do have to accept that the voluntary sector has its legal obligations. And these come under the Equality Act 2010. Now, the big main one, of course, is the duty to not discriminate in employment or in service provision, which of course applies to all voluntary sector organisations, whether they're a company or whether they're a SKIO or whether they're just a charitable organisation or even an association. If you're not constituted at all in any way, still applies to you in terms of your service provision, etc. So this concept of discrimination covers quite a wide range of things that you might do or not do, actions and inactions. It's a bit too complicated to get into great detail here today, so refer you to the further reading for more detail on that. Another thing you might be familiar with is the duty that we have to make reasonable adjustments. Adjustments that are designed to remove barriers to participation in things for disabled people. That's another key legal obligation. Now, the Equality Act also has what we call charities exceptions or charities exemptions. And this basically makes allowances for voluntary sector organisations to restrict their services to groups of particular people, if you like. However, unlike under the previous law, there are some quite strict rules about when we can now do this. So it's got to be included in our charitable instrument, so for example, your constitution, if that's your charitable instrument. And it's got to be either objectively justified, which is a legal term for basically a reasonable person can look and see clearly and understand why you must do it. Or, if you like, it's got to be something that you're doing to prevent or to compensate for some disadvantage that that group is facing because of a protected characteristic they have. Now, I'll come on to more about that later. But just in terms of those charitable exceptions, the law is now a little different for the voluntary sector than it used to be. More onus on us to show that what we do is reasonable and needed, if you like. It's obviously as well worth remembering that there are specific exemptions for religion and belief organisations. So if any of you have colleagues working in that kind of environment and they might be interested in this type of thing, I would suggest in that situation that they take professional advice, because the exceptions that apply to them were put there for their benefit because they wanted exceptions to allow them to a certain extent, discriminate on grounds of things like gender, sexual orientation, marital status and things like that. Only to a certain extent, mind you, but it's so ridiculously complicated that you really do need advice if you're wanting to go down that road. And that's basically just to sort of protect your organisation, really, which is what we're all out to do. Now, it is a complicated piece of law. It's about 230 odd pages long. So although it's simplified compared to the 9 separate bits of legislation we used to have, it's still pretty complicated. Luckily for us, lots of good guidance is out there. And I'll point you towards some of it in your further reading sheet that I'll give you. But it's worth remembering that if it feels as though it's a wee bit too much of a pain to spend time getting to grips with, it's always worth remembering that if a claim was taken against you, there's unlimited compensation available for people who make claims under discrimination law. To be honest, even just one fairly substantial claim could put an organisation like JCVS out of business. So this is part of the reason why we're so keen on getting it right. Of course, we also have funding responsibilities. There are requirements put upon us by funders. You'll see an increasing equalities focus in any kind of local authority type funding that you get, whether that's a service level agreement or you're going through a tendering process as part of their procurement, or they're just allocating grants. You'll see an increasing focus on you doing the equality stuff properly. Part of this is down to the impact of the public sector equality duty, which is basically, to give you a kind of overall flavour of it, the general public sector equality duty is to eliminate discrimination, harassment, victimisation and any other conduct that's prohibited by the Act, to promote equality of opportunity between people who have protected characteristics and those who don't, and to foster good relations between people who have protected characteristics and those who don't. So from that point of view, there's some more specific stuff that they have to do to make sure they're meeting that, and part of it is looking at how they spend their money, including who they give their grants to, etc. So at the end of the day, if you can show a bit of best practice in things like equalities monitoring, for example, or other things that they might be interested in you doing, you'll be able to have a bit of an advantage over those who might be competing with you to access funding. Helps you to demonstrate the social benefit of what you do, really, if you start mainstreaming equalities. And it also helps you to provide effective and responsive services, because what we're looking at a lot in the mainstreaming process is taking account of individual needs and making sure that what we do is appropriate for the people who need to access our services and the people who work for us. So to take it back a little bit, I've mentioned that obviously discrimination is the big thing under the Equality Act 2010. But what is it that we mean when we talk about discrimination? Well, at its basic, sort of most common denominator, we're talking about making an unjust distinction in the treatment of different categories of people. What people often don't realise is that this could be positive discrimination. So doing something that's in favour of a particular person with a protected characteristic on those grounds or something. It's not just about negative discrimination, which is the thing we tend to think about where we're saying maybe you're not getting that promotion because you're a woman, or I'm not going to let you start at this job because I think you're too young. That type of thing. Both of these types of discrimination are equally illegal under the Equality Act 2010. With a couple of exceptions, but if you do the further reading, you'll find out about it. So, the types of discrimination that we tend to see in society, it goes quite kind of right through the different spheres of the society that we live in. Now, the bottom three in this table are ones that our organisations can have a fundamental impact on if we mainstream equalities. So we're thinking about personal discrimination. This is the obvious one, where you have verbal and non-verbal behaviour and people's general attitudes. You know, some of the stuff you read in the Daily Mail, for example, would constitute personal discrimination from the point of view of the person writing it. Obviously, we as well have the group and cultural stuff. So you're thinking about, you know, who's in the in crowd and who's not. The kind of accepted practice. We've seen a lot of debate recently about the prevalence of homophobic jokes in the workplace still. You also hear a lot of sexist jokes in the workplace, and while a joke in the workplace in itself isn't a big thing, over time that type of thing can solidify into a kind of broader attitude that causes barriers to people and causes people to look at each other in a negative light. So that's the kind of thing we're thinking about there. And the institutional discrimination is the thing that we see we really make an immediate impact on when we go through the mainstreaming process. That's all about the way that the policies, procedures, rules and customs that our organisations have can create a kind of structure that perpetuates equality. So some of you might remember the Stephen Lawrence inquiry after the teenager Stephen Lawrence was murdered back in the 90s, I think that was now, it's a while ago. That was the first sort of big study into institutional discrimination, and it was found that there was lots of everyday practices in the Metropolitan Police that basically led to really bad outcomes for people from certain backgrounds, and it was all based on kind of stereotypes that were completely ingrained in the everyday practice and policy of the organisation. And the dangerous thing about institutional discrimination is that from the inside, you usually can't see it happening. You've got to step back and actually look at the different things your organisation does. Consider the possible impact it could be. And that's when you start to see it. A mainstreaming process, of course, is designed to help us do that.